I'm Marissa, 32, living on the south side of Illinois. I never thought a simple family dinner could make me question everything. I believed about home, love, and respect, but that New Year's Eve, it did. I want to ask you something before I go any further. Have you ever felt invisible in the one place where you should feel safest? Because that's exactly how I felt as I walked into my parents' house that evening. The smell of roasted turkey and fresh pine from the holiday tree hit me first, and then the usual pit in my stomach. The one that always creeps up when I see my family. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. My brother, Derek, was loud, charming, the golden child. Whatever he did was applauded, whatever I did, barely noticed. My parents, bless them, never realized how their constant comparisons slowly chipped away at my confidence. I worked hard, really hard. Scholarships, extra shifts, staying late at work so I could help my parents with bills. But whenever I mentioned anything about my life or successes, it was met with polite nods or a quick change of subject. Derek, on the other hand, could flub a project or forget a deadline, and suddenly the world revolved around him. That night, the family gathered around the dinner table. The room glowed softly with twinkling lights. I tried to focus on the conversation, on the laughter, but Derek kept leaning back in his chair, smirking at me across the table, tossing subtle jabs my way that no one else seemed to notice. Or perhaps no one else cared. "Marissa, don't tell me you're still working at that desk job. Thought you'd be climbing the ladder by now," he said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. I swallowed. I've heard this 1,000 times, and I've learned to smile, to nod, to keep my mouth shut. But something in me that night, it was different. I glanced at my mom. She gave a small, sympathetic smile. My dad avoided eye contact, and I realized painfully that their support for me was mostly performative, like they'd rather. I stayed in my quiet little corner while Derek took all the spotlight. We laughed and sipped wine. I tried to push the feelings down, tried to remind myself that it wasn't worth it to fight in my own family's living room. But then came the moment that shifted everything. Derek stood up, glass raised, and cleared his throat. "Before the clock strikes 12, I just want to say, let's toast to another year of success. And to those of us who really deserve to be recognized in this family." The words hit me like ice. Everyone clapped politely, smiling, and I froze, realizing he had just made the entire table a stage for mocking me subtly, publicly. I felt the color drain from my face. My heart raced. I wanted to disappear. My throat tightened. And then, silence. I didn't know it yet, but that one toast, the casual, cruel jab disguised as humor, was going to be the turning point of my life. Because at that moment, I decided I would never let anyone, not even my family, define my worth again. And then, just as I was gathering my thoughts, Derek winked at me, smirked, and said something that made me freeze completely. Derek's words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. "Hope you notice who really carries this family," he added, leaning back as if he had delivered a perfectly timed joke. I froze. The polite laughter around the table sounded distant, muffled. My heart pounded in a rhythm I could feel in my throat. Every smile, every clap, felt like a spotlight highlighting how invisible I'd always been in my own home. I took a sip of wine, hoping it would calm me, but the warmth only made the room feel hotter, tighter. I wanted to shout. I wanted to call him out, to say, "No, you're wrong. I matter. I do more than you ever will." But my voice caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. I excused myself to the kitchen under the guise of getting more water. I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my shaking hands. The sound of the party, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all seemed distant now, like I was underwater. I kept replaying his toast in my head, dissecting every word. It wasn't just the public jab, it was how familiar it felt. Every holiday, every family gathering, Derek had a way of making me feel small while presenting it as a joke. I hated myself for letting it hurt me. I hated myself for letting it chip away at my confidence again. But I couldn't help it. Not tonight. As I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, something clicked. This pattern, this lifetime of feeling less than, ignored, belittled, it wasn't mine to carry anymore. It wasn't my fault. I had spent decades trying to earn their approval, trying to be the daughter they wanted, the sister who measured up to Derek. But I realized something crucial. I didn't need their approval to validate my worth. That was the first moment of clarity. It was terrifying, but liberating. I wasn't going to explode at the dinner table. I wasn't going to beg them to see me. I was going to step back, and I was going to reclaim my life quietly, without drama, without spectacle. When I returned to the living room, Derek was still smiling, soaking up the attention. I took my seat without saying a word. My parents didn't notice the storm inside me, and maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time they didn't. As the clock neared midnight, I sat quietly, letting others cheer, letting Derek bask in his self-assumed superiority. But inside, I made a silent promise. This would be the last time anyone would make me feel small in my own family. And then the clock struck 12. Fireworks exploded outside the window. Glasses clinked. Derek raised his again, this time with a self-satisfied grin, and said, "Here's to another year of real winners." My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, scream, cry, but I didn't. Instead, I did something that shocked even me. I raised my glass, calmly, quietly, not to Derek, not to my parents, but to myself, to new beginnings. I whispered under my breath. No one heard it. And that was the point. I didn't know yet what my next steps would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never let anyone, not even my family, dictate my value again. And just as the fireworks faded, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a New Year's message from a friend. It wasn't. It was a message from Derek, and reading it made my blood run cold. I stared at my phone, frozen. Derek's message glared at me in bold letters. "Can't believe you still sulk like a child. Lighten up, it's just a joke. Don't take everything so seriously. You'll never survive in the real world if you keep being this sensitive." I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest. My first instinct was to reply, angry, defensive, maybe even cruel. I wanted to type something sharp, something that would make him flinch, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there in the quiet aftermath of the fireworks, letting the words sink in. The familiar pang of humiliation hit me, but so did something new. I didn't have to engage. For years, I had argued, explained, begged for recognition, only to be dismissed. And now here I was, holding the power I never realized I had, the power to choose my response. I put my phone down and leaned back in my chair. I let myself feel everything: hurt, anger, disbelief, but I didn't let it control me. I took a deep breath and whispered, again quietly, "This is not my burden anymore." The next morning, I woke up with a strange calm. I didn't expect it. Usually the humiliation would follow me for days, replaying in my mind, gnawing at my confidence. But something had shifted. Something inside me had clicked. I could step back. I could exist outside their judgment. Over the next few weeks, I started to implement small changes. I stopped volunteering for family errands I didn't want to do. I limited phone calls and visits that left me drained. I carved out time for myself, my career, my friends, my passions, and with every boundary I set, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't easy, Derek noticed. He sent snide comments and texts, made casual remarks at family gatherings. But the difference now was that they didn't reach me. They no longer had the power to shape my self-worth. One evening, a month later, I got another message. This time from my mom. "We miss you. Are you okay?" I paused. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain, to seek approval. But I realized that my emotional health was no longer up for negotiation. I replied simply, "I'm fine. I'm taking care of myself." The relief that washed over me was profound. For the first time, I wasn't reacting out of fear or guilt. I was acting out of self-respect. And slowly, life became quieter, but not empty. I poured energy into my work, into friendships that truly mattered, into building a life that reflected who I really was, not who my family expected me to be. I started to notice the cracks forming around Derek. He didn't get the attention he craved. People stopped laughing at his jabs the way they used to, and while I never sought revenge, I realized that the very spotlight he tried to steal from me was fading on him, naturally. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. It was just justice in the form of truth finally settling into its place. But the most important moment came one afternoon when my mom asked me to come over for coffee. I walked in, calm, collected, no trace of anger or hurt in my voice. Derek was there, as usual, acting like nothing had changed. And I did something I had never done before. I set a boundary, quietly, firmly, without raising my voice. "I'm here to visit, not to compete. I'll join conversations I want to, and I'll step away when I need to. I hope you can respect that." Derek froze for a moment. He didn't like it. But this time, it didn't matter. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I simply existed in my truth. And that, I realized, was worth more than 1,000 arguments. Weeks turned into months, and life outside my family home started to feel lighter. The weight of needing approval from Derek, from my parents, from anyone who had minimized me, was slowly lifting. I focused on my work, pouring energy into projects that challenged me and finally gave me a sense of accomplishment I didn't have to explain to anyone. My friendships became deeper, more intentional, and more nourishing. I realized that love and support could come from people I chose, not only from people I was born to. At the next family gathering, I noticed a subtle shift. Derek tried his usual antics, cracking jokes and nudging my dad to laugh along. But the reaction he expected wasn't there. My dad's chuckle was half-hearted. My mom's attention was divided, distracted by other conversations. And Derek's carefully rehearsed smirk faltered. I didn't gloat. I didn't point it out. I simply observed, calmly sipping my drink and engaging only on my own terms. It was strange, almost ironic. While I had spent years feeling small, he was beginning to feel the absence of the spotlight he had always relied on, and he didn't know how to navigate it. One evening, my mom called me again, asking for advice about Derek. He had been struggling at work, missing deadlines, and, uncharacteristically, he called her in a panic. She confessed, hesitating, "Marissa, I think he's realizing he can't get by on charm and jokes alone." I listened quietly. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt validated. Years of being dismissed, belittled, ignored, and compared finally had a counterpart. Proof that life has its own way of balancing things. And then there was my first truly liberating moment with Derek. He tried to corner me one afternoon at a family brunch. "You've changed," he said, a mix of confusion and irritation in his voice. "You're different." I smiled gently, calmly, with no trace of resentment. "I've been taking care of myself," I said. "And it feels good." He didn't know how to respond. He tried a few more jabs, but I either ignored them or responded with neutral, firm boundaries. No drama, no escalation. And slowly, over time, he stopped. It wasn't public humiliation. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spectacle. It was simply the natural consequence of my unshakable self-respect. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Life at home became quieter, yes, but healthier. My parents noticed I was happier, calmer, less reactive. I stopped being the emotional punching bag Derek relied on. And for the first time in my life, I understood that family doesn't have to define your worth. Your choices, your courage, and your boundaries do. Sometimes I catch myself remembering that New Year's toast, that subtle, humiliating jab, and instead of shame, I feel gratitude, that it pushed me to see my own value and to stop waiting for anyone else to acknowledge it. Because the truth is, the only approval you ever need is your own. The months that followed felt like a gentle, steady reclaiming of my life. I wasn't chasing anyone's attention anymore, not Derek's, not my parents'. I was finally learning to thrive in the quiet strength of self-respect. At work, I was taking on bigger projects, mentoring colleagues, and even getting recognition for achievements I'd previously thought only mattered if my family noticed. For the first time, I celebrated my victories freely, without the shadow of comparison hanging over me. Family gatherings became easier too. Derek still tried to test the waters occasionally, dropping small jabs or smug comments. But I no longer flinched. I listened, acknowledged, and then moved on. It wasn't coldness, it was clarity. I had learned that my peace was more important than any argument. One evening, my mom asked me to sit down for a quiet talk. She admitted softly that she had noticed the shift, not just in me, but in Derek. "He's struggling to get the attention he's used to," she said, hesitant. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Mom, I don't want to hurt anyone, but I have to live by my own rules now. I've learned that I can't keep giving my energy to people who don't respect me." She sighed, a mix of relief and sadness. "I think I finally understand. You've grown into someone strong." And in that moment, I realized the full truth. Strength isn't about proving someone wrong. Strength is quietly choosing yourself every day, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the people around you don't understand. Derek never apologized. He never acknowledged the things he said or did, but that didn't matter anymore. The subtle, natural justice unfolded over time. He no longer had the social dominance he once wielded effortlessly. People stopped laughing at his jabs. He felt the weight of his own words, the loneliness of attention he couldn't command, and I moved forward without needing him to change. I learned the hardest but most liberating lesson: blood does not always mean family. Family is who respects, supports, and cherishes you. And if someone refuses to do that, it's okay to step back. Now, when I reflect on that New Year's Eve, I don't feel humiliation or anger. I feel gratitude that it opened my eyes. That one cruel toast didn't define me. It revealed the life I needed to claim for myself. And sometimes I ask myself, and I'll ask you too, how long have you been carrying someone else's judgment as if it were your own? And what would happen if you stopped? Because the truth is, you don't need to fight for approval you'll never receive. You just need the courage to stand quietly, firmly, and claim your own worth. It's been over a year since that New Year's Eve, the night Derek made that toast. The memory still lingers, but now it comes with perspective instead of pain. I've built a life where I matter on my own terms. My apartment is full of laughter from friends who have become my chosen family. My career is thriving, and my self-worth is no longer tied to anyone else's opinions, not even my parents. Sometimes my parents ask for advice. Sometimes they notice the changes in Derek, and sometimes they simply watch as I move through life calmly and confidently. I don't need to fix them. I don't need their approval. My peace is not negotiable. The subtle justice that unfolded in my family's dynamics wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. Derek's influence waned because I stopped feeding it with attention, with energy, with fear. And that was the most powerful change of all. I still see him occasionally at family events, but I no longer feel the sting of comparison or mockery. I greet him politely, set my boundaries firmly, and then return to my life. I realize something important. Justice doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. It often arrives quietly, naturally, when we stop tolerating what diminishes us. Looking back, I am grateful for the pain, the humiliation, and the heartbreak because it forced me to value myself, to prioritize my well-being, and to learn the meaning of healthy boundaries. I no longer measure my worth by someone else's applause. So now I ask you, who in your life have you been letting define your value? Who deserves your energy and who doesn't? Because here's the truth I've learned. You are allowed to protect yourself, to step back, to choose your own happiness. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who consistently undermines you. And when you do, you might just discover a quiet, steady kind of justice, the kind that doesn't require confrontation, only clarity. This story is fictional. Its purpose is to inspire reflection on self-worth, healthy boundaries, and emotional resilience. No one deserves to feel diminished, and your peace is always worth protecting. Sometimes the people we expect to lift us up are the ones who hold us down. I spent years seeking approval that I would never get until I realized the only validation I needed was my own. You don't have to fight to be seen. You don't have to compete for love you've already earned inside yourself. Setting boundaries.